Consoles have been a very important part of gaming since, well, the beginning of gaming, really. Although, not all of them were successful, especially at the time. But sometimes a console failing has absolutely nothing to do with the console being bad and has completely different factors involved. And that's what we're gonna be covering today. The consoles that deserved way better than what they got. Let's start out with a very simple one, the Dreamcast. Yes, the Dreamcast, aka the final console Sega ever made before completely quitting the console market. And it's actually really good.
Okay, if it's that good, then why did it do poorly?
Well, it kinda just lacked support outside of first-party titles. Most titles the Dreamcast had were first-party titles. It also had some weird and experimental ones like Seaman. Although, to be fair, that entire game was a fever dream, and I'm sure most people would probably forget about it had it not been so, well, itself. It had good games like Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure 2, and even Knights in there, but the
Slight correction time. She was actually released on the Sega Saturn, not the Dreamcast. Although I cannot actually blame him because it seems like Sega themselves have even made this mistake, as shown here.
problem is that Sega really didn't have third-party support. No third-party support kinda just completely kills a console right then and there. In fact, that's a big reason why the PS5 is actually doing so poorly right now. No third-party support for it. Most of the exclusives for the PS5 are just Sony properties. But what made the Dreamcast so unique was it had an internet connection. Now you might say, Crow, that's pretty bog standard now. How is that impressive? Well, back in the day, not every console had an internet connection capability. Only the Dreamcast actually had this and actually used it for a couple different things. It was mostly used for exclusive downloadable content for Sonic Adventure 2, and there was even an entire MMO for the console, Phantasy Star Online. So yeah, it was an impressive piece of hardware. It's just kind of a shame that Sega really just didn't have any third-party support for it. And like I said, this was the last console Sega ever made before completely dropping out of the console market. Although, ironically enough, Sonic Adventure 2 would later get a GameCube port, that being Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, and a PC port of that, kinda making what's left of the Dreamcast irrelevant. It also segues me into the GameCube. You see, this was going somewhere. Yes, you heard me right, the GameCube.
I thought everyone loved that console.
Now they do, Mimo, now they do. But at the time, it was actually a commercial flop. I know that's really hard to believe given the GameCube's reputation nowadays, especially since it has some all-time classics like Super Mario Sunshine and the Metroid Prime series, as well as some classic Zelda games like Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. So it had a ton of good games.
Okay, you've just proven why people liked the thing. Why did it fail?
Short answer, the stupid disc.
Alright, that makes a lot more sense.
If you're unfamiliar with the proprietary nature of the GameCube discs, they were really tiny and made for only the GameCube, meaning you can only get them from Nintendo. The main reason for this has to do with the fact that after a while, Nintendo got extremely protective. After the awful incident that was the Philips CDI, they basically made it so that they were the only ones that can do that sort of thing. If you want to be on their console, you gotta use their discs and their rules. And needless to say, developers did not like this very much.
Oh, who could have guessed that forcing people to use a proprietary disc instead of the standard disc that every other game console used at the time was a terrible idea?
Well, to be fair, Nintendo does love its gimmicks. But yeah, that made it a pain in the ass to develop for the GameCube. A lot of devs did develop ports for the GameCube, but because of the proprietary nature of the game disc, a lot of devs probably didn't want to. Now, mind you, that's just kind of my theory. The reason I say this is because things like the Xbox and the PlayStation 2 did not have this proprietary system, they just used the standard disc at the time. And something that also kind of really reinforces my own personal theory is Nintendo stopped using proprietary discs for the Wii. For the Wii, they just used the standard DVD disc instead of the proprietary discs that the GameCube used. And think of it from a developer's perspective. Would you rather develop for the Xbox and PlayStation, which use the same kind of disc technology, or would you rather develop for the GameCube, which uses proprietary disc technology? It's kind of an obvious thing. And yes, Nintendo actually had some real competition with Sony and even Microsoft at the time with the Xbox. So in other words, the GameCube had a lot of competition, on top of being put at a severe disadvantage because of this one single thing.
It sounds like the GameCube got shafted by Nintendo. I wonder if this is foreshadowing to something.
Well, that would be foreshadowing to a lot of things, Mimo.
That's fair.
But that does beg the question of why is the GameCube loved now? The simple answer, the Wii. Yeah, on top of the Wii being just a really good console, it had backwards compatibility with GameCube. And suddenly GameCube games can now suddenly be played on the Wii. Meaning games like Wind Waker, Animal Crossing, Twilight Princess, Luigi's Mansion, all these popular games suddenly got a chance to actually shine again. And since the Wii was already just a really good console to begin with, it really did help push the GameCube back in the limelight. Well, it's games anyway.
Does this mean you're going to segue into the Wii U?
No.
Wait, why not? You have the perfect segue, you moron! Why aren't you segueing into it?
Because I have a lot to say about the Wii U. And I mean a lot. Because I am very mad at what Nintendo did to the console. Because I have a lot of things to say about it. And I'm tired of people slandering it.
Oh goody, this is going to be fun. Alright, fine. What are we segueing into next?
The PS Vita! The PlayStation Vita is a really good console that got shafted by Sony. It wouldn't be the first time this has happened. PS5 isn't a bad console either, just Sony's an idiot.
A company being stupid? In this day and age? No, that's unheard of. But why are you defending the PS5?
Because it isn't a bad console?
It's overpriced, it doesn't have any games, and it is a glorified Blu-ray player by your own admission. Why on earth are you defending it?
Because it isn't even that bad. It has the same problems that the GameCube had of no real third-party support. And even then, the first-party games are not even that good. I mean, you had Spider-Man Miles Morales and Spider-Man 2. And I mean, Miles Morales was pretty alright. It was a retread of the original in a lot of ways, and the story was, well, again, a retread of the original and was, well, alright. But it was fine. Not worth $70, but still fine. Spider-Man 2 kinda just sucked. And the only real big game of note is Astrobot. But even then, this is a giant celebration of Sony's history and all the products they have. Don't get me wrong, I'm not defending Sony for being stupid. I'm just saying they just didn't have a very good hand to play. I'm still never gonna forgive them for the fact that they abandoned Sly Cooper and many of the other PlayStation series. Who knows, maybe I'll talk about Sly Cooper one day. I actually really liked this series back in the day, and I maybe want to talk about the other series that I never really got to play. Mimo, are you gonna be mad at me for adding things to the backlog?
I'm just used to it by now.
But I guess since Mimo brought it up, I'll talk about it right quick. The main problem is, no games, no all that, you know this by now. But it's not a bad console. It's just kind of dealt a bad hand. And yeah, I do like to call this thing the glorified Blu-ray player. But it can still play PS4 games at a higher resolution. But the PS4 Pro also exists and is a lot cheaper. Yeah, Sony's just a bunch of idiots. And you think the move would be bring back old franchises, like Sly Cooper and, Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter. And they've kind of did this? But even then, they're debatably not worth the price. The PS5 is not a bad console, it's just in a very awkward position. Now that said, I can't say the same thing about the Vita. But before we talk about the PS Vita, we need to talk about its bigger brother, the PS Portable. And yeah, it's a really good console. Not groundbreaking, but it doesn't really need to be. It just need to be good. And it is. That's the thing, the PSP might not be revolutionary or forever change the portable gaming sphere forever. It's just kinda good. And that's all it really needs to be, is just good. And it sold decently well. And I mean, the biggest problems it had was not even with the console itself, but rather its derivative, the Go variant. It was just a bit too expensive, or at least that's what a lot of people thought at the time. So it had a good run, it was moderately successful, and people liked it. Thus, a sequel console should follow suit, right? Right? I mean, it makes logical sense.
Oh, you poor innocent fool.
Yeah, that's what really confuses me about the Vita, is it was a commercial flop, despite the fact its predecessor did reasonably well and didn't have any complaints. And it only failed in the West, weirdly enough, as well. In Japan, it actually was still getting support for quite a while. And in fact, only until a lot of developers discovered the PC market and Steam did they stop really porting games to the Vita. That should tell you how successful a console this damn thing was. But weirdly, not in the West. And that's the confusing part. It's not a bad console, it just didn't do well for whatever reason. It's a weird anomaly. Like, you'd think it would at least have the same amount of success the PSP had, but no.
I believe you're forgetting a certain console that Nintendo released around this time as well.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense now. Still very dumb, but that makes a lot more sense. I still think the Vita still could have stood on its own legs without being compared to the 3DS. Especially since critics generally did like it and no one said, oh, this thing is awful. It's not like the 3DS, the superior console. No, it easily could have stood on its own two legs, but for whatever reason, Sony just gave up on it and said, well, that's all for now. Let's just dump this thing in the river.
I can personally relate to that in many ways.
So, yeah, this is just confusing. But there's one final console I do want to talk about, and it's probably going to be the longest part of them all. So buckle up, we're gonna talk about the Wii U! I'm probably going to piss a lot of people off with this opinion. The Wii U is not a bad console and never was. Change my mind.
That's an awfully bold statement. I sure do hope you're gonna back it up.
Oh, I actually will. But before we talk about the Wii U, we need to talk about the Wii, as it's actually quite important. The Wii was a massively successful console and Nintendo's golden goose. This thing basically printed money for Nintendo. It was great for the casual market especially since Wii Sports was actually really good. And it also started its own trend of motion controls, which every other console failed miserably. Especially the Xbox with the Kinect. Seriously, never forget that Microsoft tried to shove this damn thing down our throats, especially with the Xbox One. Oh look, foreshadowing! And I mean, the Wii had a ton of great games, it did really well, it allowed you to play GameCube games, it was just a good console. So Nintendo thought, let's make a sequel to the Wii. The Wii U. That sounds like a great idea. A more powerful Wii, plus you get to play all your old Wii games as well? That sounds like a great idea. What could possibly go wrong? Nintendo. Nintendo is what went wrong. Nintendo advertised this thing in all the wrong ways. And it very much annoys me because the Wii U is not bad. It was never bad. Nintendo was just being a bunch of idiots by advertising this thing like it was a portable console.
I think you're gonna need to give a little bit of context for that.
Alright, I probably should give a little bit of context for those that are unfamiliar with the Wii U's legacy. Basically, after the Wii was released, Nintendo wanted a sequel console, the Wii U. The Wii U was basically meant to be a more powerful version of the Wii with the gamepad, and this gamepad would basically be the gimmick. And at the time, Nintendo really loved their gimmicks. The problem? They marketed it so badly that no one really knew what it was. Was it a brand new console? Was it a sequel console? Was it an accessory? They didn't tell you. Plus, they kind of misled you altogether by saying you can take the game in the other room. No. Only some games supported that, and others just used the gamepad as a mini-map. So, in other words, that was only possible on a couple of games in the games that supported it. And the gamepad itself did not have great battery life, so you couldn't even do that. If Nintendo just called this thing the Wii 2, I don't think a lot of people would be as confused. But their marketing team just kind of dropped the ball on this thing, and that just kind of killed it before it could even get its foot out the door. Although, this did not stop Nintendo from learning their mistake of naming things very poorly. That honor would actually belong to the new 3DS XL.
Are you just referring to the 3DS XL when it was new?
No, I'm talking about the new 3DS XL.
What are you talking about?
The new 3DS XL!
By the almighty robot policeman, you're not making any sense.
Exactly! Thanks for proving my point, Mimo.
What point?
That this console is named incredibly stupidly.
Wait, are you saying it's literally called the new 3DS XL, as in that's its name?
Yep.
What on earth were they thinking?
That's what I want to know. And no, that's not a bit. This was actually called the new 3DS XL. The new was in its name. Yeah, try explaining that to a store clerk and actually getting them to understand what you're talking about. So needless to say, this was a common trend of Nintendo naming things incredibly stupidly, and that was the final straw that broke it. If you're wondering why the Nintendo Switch 2 is just called the Nintendo Switch 2, this is exactly why. But I mean, the Wii U had a ton of great games. It had Lego City Undercover, it had Bayonetta 2, it had Hyrule Warriors, it had all this, and so much more, but Nintendo just completely shot themselves in the foot by being a bunch of idiots and leaning too hard into the gimmick. And what really annoys me is that the Wii U basically died so that the Switch could walk, and yet the Switch somehow still keeps getting crippled. Because yeah, I hate the Nintendo Switch. I hate that this thing is supposed to be the successor to the Wii U, and yet it has so many problems that the Wii U just never had. Nintendo won't fix stick drift, they won't fix the fact that Doc scratches the console, and they won't fix any of this. Yet the Wii U had to die because Nintendo was stupid. The Nintendo Switch is a bad console that has so many problems that never got fixed, yet it's a financial success. The Wii U is a perfectly fine console with a lot of potential and some great applications that died because Nintendo didn't know how to market the thing. Do you understand how ridiculous that whole thing sounds?
I can relate to the Wii U in many ways. Probably because we're both blue, and our creators never cared about us.
Well, I got one more thing in common, Mimo.
And what would that be?
I like ya.
Fantastic! I'm gonna go fry my circuits now.
She's not gonna do that, don't worry. But that is all for now, actually. And if you enjoyed this, well, I'm glad. Maybe like, comment, subscribe if you feel like it. It's not necessary, but it does help me out in the algorithm. And maybe tell me which one of these consoles you personally think deserved a lot more credit than what they got at the time. I know some of you probably do have a lot of nostalgia for these things. Oh, and in case you're wondering why I didn't mention the Xbox One, that's because it was just kind of an okay console that got better over time because Microsoft stopped being idiots and stopped forcing things like Forced Online and the Kinect onto us. But other than that, I have nothing to say on it. And with that, that's all for now, and goodbye.